In the last episode, we talked about what the cannabis industry is like right now, how the regulations, or lack of proper regulations really, has severely slowed down its growth. This is part 2 of Cannabis, the plant that keeps giving. We hope you enjoy this conversation.
Welcome to Critical Thinking Required, hosted by LBW. This podcast is intended for free thinkers, entrepreneurs, and knowledge seekers. Join us as we discuss relevant financial topics, explore with guests their financial journeys, and engage with experts in industries such as space, media and entertainment, real estate, and many more. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
Well, okay, so my question that I got here is for both of you. So feel free to whomever. So could you guys tell us about how you guys operate within this industry as you have described it to us here today? What are the barriers, the growth opportunities, the risk factors? And then I have a couple of follow-ups to that.
Well, very carefully. There's lots of attorneys involved that typically will interpret state regulations, but it prevents me, for example, from doing a lot of the testing that I would like to do on our products. I have to come up with like creative ways around that testing, because I can't say, our product would be used with a cannabis from the state of California. There's a testing lab on the East Coast that I want to send my samples to and have it tested. I cannot send that over there to have that tested. I cannot pay them to do that testing because it cannot be transported across state lines. So it greatly inhibits us, and we have to be creative. I know there's an example of a researcher in the US who wants to study cannabis actually available in dispensaries. So the approach that they've taken is essentially to ask the person to use a cannabis that they've purchased from the dispensary. They've said, use this. And then they say, use it in your house. Well, we come outside afterwards and we have a van and we're going to draw some blood and do some tests. And we'll give you an Amazon gift card or something, but we cannot pay for the cannabis. We cannot touch the cannabis. We cannot do anything like that. So it's led to some very creative means that have given us some good insights, but you could really do a lot better research if we didn't have to worry about this plant crossing state lines to test it at a lab and ask, what is this, what effects is this having, positive or negative, or, it just, it's ridiculous. Josh?
The scenario you set up is just cracking me up. It's like, go in your house and smoke some weed, and then come out to this van. We've got candy, we've got popsicles, maybe some questions for you. And like, that's a trap. I learned about this. I'm not getting in your van. So that's like the big barrier, right? They have to do some weird situation that we all learned not to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, the biggest barrier, and it is tied into money, is that you kind of need a trust fund to own a company here in the cannabis space. It is not. It used to be in the pre-regulation, you could start a company, and if you had in your garage, and if you had the best product, you won. That's not the case anymore. You need a ton of money just to get the permits, and then you need a ton of money to deal with the regulation. So what does that mean? Well, the schools that are funded by companies that are going to end up getting the rights to do this research, there'll probably be some tunnels between the company and the research and how the funding works. And I already see this have gone from an everyman's game to a rich man's game. And I see that kind of proliferating. Where's sort of the glimmer of hope in that? Well, that's in the growth opportunity. You're going to see more MSOs, but what's going to happen is, instead of Canadian companies buying American companies are going to start buying Canadian companies, because they went up to Canada and built these huge facilities that could grow 8 times the amount of pot that Canada could ever smoke. And then they hired subpar growers to basically grow more ditchweed that no one wanted, that then they turned into bag cartridges that further no one wanted. And so Canada lost their shirt many times over, overbuilding infrastructure and not understanding the product. Now, American companies, they weren't able to grow so fast. So some of these big MSOs are still very small in comparison. They had a little bit more time to refine their craft and get the skill sets to actually grow some good cannabis. And so you're starting to see some good cannabis come from the East Coast, and that wasn't the case before. And so, so you have this MSO growth that's going to continue. But what you also have is sort of the winification of cannabis coming from smaller growers. And so hopefully you have this big mass thing and the winification happening at the same time, and that they don't happen in series, but they happen in parallel. In most industries, you have McDonald's and then the responsive Five Guys, right? And McDonald's got to grow for 60 years, and then Five Guys got to like bite at their heels real quickly for 15 and grow. Right now in cannabis, you have MSOs and you have the winification happening in parallel. So how that plays out and what that means for good product, we will see.
To be clear, MSOs, winification, can you explain?
MSO is multi-state operators, and winification is the phenomenon of the people becoming more interested and being able to spend more money on a diverse set of product and spend more and more. So it's also like coffee. First people drink Folgers, then Starbucks, now Blue Bottle. You went from 5 cents a cup to $8 a cup. That's a winification of coffee. We had a winification of burgers. So it's just it's a West Coast. I think it's a San Francisco West Sonoma term. But
okay, so
it's associated with wine, right? So like, as you get to like the $3 chuck all the way up to your like, well, I don't even know what the right terms are, the $1,000 a bottle scenario.
Okay, so like for to put it into Midwestern terms, like where we're from, like in Madison, there was this whole thing about craft brews.
Yes.
It's craft brews. It's craft brews as a response to Schlitz.
Okay.
Right?
Got it. That helps. Where do you guys think that this might all hash out? So there's a couple of points here that I want to touch on. One, cannabis being banned. Somebody else is going to grow it somewhere. It might go into the illicit market. This kind of all reminds me, it's like Prohibition for the 21st century. And you'd think that we would learn our lesson. Doesn't sound like maybe we have a little bit in that we haven't, but I don't know. Well, we'll see how that all shakes out. My point though is that after Prohibition, the alcohol industry was then regulated to the hilt in the sense that you could no longer vertically integrate. So I'm curious if what do you guys see in the markets? Do you guys see a lot of companies trying to vertically integrate? And if so, how are they able to achieve that with all the regulatory fragmentation that you guys have mentioned? Could you guys speak to that a little bit?
Okay, so there's two things happening with that. One, you have regulation that forces companies to be vertical. So in Florida, you have to be vertical. It's terrible because a good grower has to have a grow and a manufacturing and a dispensary to get you product. They can't just specialize and do one thing well. Now, on the other side, let's go to California. You can be vertical or not vertical. There's business advantages to being vertical, right? Supply chain. It's a fractured industry. I don't know who's going to bring my product, my biomass. If I grow it myself, I have a little bit more assurance that I'm going to get what I need. So you have this idea to grow, but the dispensary owners aren't necessarily the best growers. Growers are the best growers. And so you have this sort of mismatch where you start to see, it's a vertical company, but are they really bringing the best product through their company? Usually it's gotten better. The California companies can deliver like a B+, A-, but the outside company that just grows and brings in things that are like purple and orange and diamondy and green and sparkly, that's just a more specialized touch. And so you still have in my opinion, the need for specialized non-vertical industry to be able to exist with vertical companies. So, that's sort of there's a business advantage when you're allowed, if you have the choice to do it, and there's really a consumer disadvantage when the government forces companies to be vertical.
I have a mouthful of a question that I want to set the stage for, that I think leads us into our last section before we go into the close of this podcast. which the last section we want to just touch on is, which we've kind of covered through a lot of this, is really the future of this industry. We kind of started a little bit with that, but just wrapping up any other thoughts on that. But before I kind of go in there, this question is a combination of a political nature and a business nature. Here's the stage. In Wisconsin, the director of public relations for Corbell last year said that half of their brandy sales, more than that, consumed by Wisconsin. Wisconsin, although not the top producer, and that's Pennsylvania, I believe, of beer, and not the top consumer of beer. I believe that is New Hampshire now, but still in the top 5 for both. There's a very, very much a strong drinking culture here and other places as well. And the reason why I'm setting that is the political piece of this. And then here comes the business piece of this. How do all these players get along? We have CBD producers. We have vaping in this industry. We have straight up cannabis usage from a smoking standpoint or edibles. We have soft drinks trying to infuse things, water trying to infuse things. There's a lot of players that have their takes on this, of which there's a political bent, which we've talked about, to all of this. My question is, can all of these people get along? Can they all win? Or do some of these people lose for someone else to win? Whoever wants to handle that.
I mean, I think I have to think about the future aspect. I know what we've observed to date is that, the companies in those industries, like the alcohol industry, has started buying, cannabis, investing in a stake in cannabis. And so, does that mean that both get to win, as opposed to, one industry is just throwing its weight around and essentially acquiring and, taking out competition, or, maybe that's a win. I don't know. I mean, I think being a scientist, I guess I look at the business world and think, it's all pretty cutthroat. So does anybody really win? Jeff Bezos. There are some that do, but I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm optimistic, but do I think, like, the way the US is now, that big business isn't somehow going to beat out the little guy? I'm not that optimistic. Maybe on the local level.
I think the question was, you framed it in an interesting way, where you talked about the products as the competitive aspect. And I think it's one way to look at it, but I'm going to propose a different way. It's really about what motivates someone to smoke weed. And there's more or less 3 real motivations that exist. There's one imaginary one, but there's 3 real ones. The first real one is medical. I'm sick. I'm ill. I'm dying.
Yeah.
Nothing else works, and I need this medicine because I know how to make it work for me. That's motivation 1. That's you can see how that segment of industry is very exact. It needs a lot of data. It wants to know what was done so they can replicate that over and over and over again. And if things start to change, they're going to want a really responsive way to communicate that change and what they need along it. You have motivation 2, the largest motivation. I want to relax. I want to chill. I want to sleep. This is the majority of people who say, I don't smoke during the day, I smoke at night, right? And they found that cannabis, increases the performance of sleep and relaxation, okay? Then you have this third category, and I hinted at them. They're the performance enhancers. They're the ones that we used to call like stoners, but now we call them VP of product development. And so we know how to use, the modulators, or the people that know how to use it as a performance enhancement, use it throughout the day, usually at different intervals and different amounts to induce the performance enhancement that they need. Okay. And so we know artist smokes it, it kind of relaxes, they can get zoned out and do the thing that they need to do. There's a performance enhancement there, but it also helps you zoom into an Excel spreadsheet. It also helps you excel into a group process or putting a deck together. And so you have these motivations, and then you have products that try to meet the user's motivations along the way. And that's when you get the gummies and the drinks and the CBD and all that stuff, the users, they're not in competition. The user is moving through those products as their needs change and as they learn about them. So it's less about a category, right, holding something and fending off others from that category, and more about making it accessible for consumers to be able to move through those categories. And that brings it to the last point, which is the channels. How is it distributed? That's where people are not going to get along. I've had this theory about product slip for years, and just this week it was confirmed with Bezos and announcing the change with their policy on cannabis, you know. And we've said in the cannabis industry for years, at one point a product is going to slip. Something's going to be understood, replicable, and predictable, and they're going to say this product can be sold in these other channels because it's safe. We know about it, right? And so the channel is where the battle comes. The channel is the liquor store versus the convenience store versus the grocery store versus the high-end boutique kind of like beer shop, you know. Those channels are going to get really competitive over time, and they already kind of are, but because, you know, you go into like Boston, there's like 5 dispensaries and they all think they're like the biggest. They're like, oh, we're masterminds of cannabis. No, you have 5 dispensaries and millions of people. That's just a math thing. You go to San Francisco and there's, in certain neighborhoods, 6 dispensaries within eyeshot, and they're all doing a 1/6 of what they did when the other dispensary wasn't there. So there's channel competition. Then there's delivery competition. I'm just going to sit at my couch. I'm convenient. I just need it to go to sleep. I don't need to go to the store and learn like from a weed college about what's what. I just need weed. So I'm going to order this regular weed to my door, and I'm going to sit here. It's going to show up and be handed to me. That's a channel competition, you know? So it's more about how do the accessibility among consumers and how do those places compete, and then what deals do they have from their assortment inside of those channels, right? How does that click back to what companies they work with and what's accessible at those channels? You might have a company only want to work with a certain channel. That's when it starts to kind of go back. So I think all the problems come from channels and retail and all that. And really, in the background of it, the companies are really looking for great employees because people move companies, and they're really looking for great best practices, and they're open to share some of that information with each other. So that's how I think it gets. In the future, it needs to be, the channels need to be sorted so that the rest of the industry can understand where the product's going.
That was a wonderful breakdown of the competition of the industry, and I truly appreciate that. I am curious, though. I am not familiar with the Amazon situation with Bezos and the potential product slip that you mentioned. Could you just expound upon that just a little bit? I'm just curious on what exactly happened there.
So Bezos announced that they're no longer going to be drug testing Amazon employees. You know,
how does that feed into the products?
They're not going to be drug testing for cannabis. They're going to be drug testing for other stuff, to be clear.
They're not going to drug test their employees for cannabis.
Yeah. Okay.
So what that means in space is they're setting themselves up to handle cannabis, because if they're not going to test you on the way in, they're saying it's okay. They're sort of, it's a, oh man, I forget the term of this. It's like when you do like you propose an idea, but not fully, and you see how it kind of floats out there and what happens to it. That's what they just did. So anyone knows anything about business knows, oh, you're making fertile territory to grow some cannabis industry there. So that's what is, when we say we know that it's coming, you know, don't freak out that Bezos is going to sell weed. Figure out how to sell him weed. And that's what I mean about the channels needing to be sorting. And so that consumers know where to get the product. Because Amazon might be Amazon basics of weed. And it might be like, I used to mess with that stuff, but now I know just to order from the local place and not go to, you know, there'll be different parts of that. Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification. That makes a lot of sense.
That's all really interesting. So in a sense, to an extent from the way I originally phrased it, to a larger degree, like the tide rises, all ships, and then that gets caught in the channel, and no pun intended there. But from a channel standpoint, to me, I mean, distribution is a big time game. and not everybody can get into that. So I've always kind of thought, well, from the production or, that piece of it, like I've always thought that is really a big player's game, and some small people might make it or will get bought up or whatever, but the big players just win that. And that might or may not be true, but is that definitely true with distribution though? Do the big players survive and nobody else?
Yet to be seen. We just don't know. There's not enough, there's not enough time to understand that. That being said, everyone in California started self-distributing when they could. And over time, they found out that self-distributing is hard. And so they tried to cut deals with bigger distributors who wanted too much for doing too little. And so there's sort of this bounce where then companies, the market sort of adjusted and people started to make deals. But distribution in some industries is way more than just drop shipping a product to somewhere. And in some cases, what does a distributor mean in cannabis? Is that someone that's going to develop your brand, develop your sales context? Are they really taking it on in a sense that, like what I do with Green Name, where we take on a company, we really want to sell it to everywhere in as many places as we can? Is that really, are distributors really doing that? Or are they simply fulfilling an order? And so what a distributor does, how much they do, and what those services cost has not really been sorted. I would think though, that because distribution is very capital intensive and you need equipment, you need vans, you need cameras, you need warehouses, it's a lot of infrastructure. I would think that companies that start with better cash funding are going to have a little bit easier time. But if you're just a distribution company that's picking up everyone's scraps that no one wants, you're going to get no sales. And if you've got a product that everyone wants, you're in the driver's seat with the distribution. So who has the power? We don't know yet. Right now, dispensaries have a lot of power.
What would you say, Echo? I'm going to ask you this from the science perspective of what the future can hold. Josh, I'm going to ask you from the business standpoint. Been at this since you were 13. The regulation, the legalization, the reclassification, when all that is said and done, which I don't think anyone's arguing that that's not going to happen at some point. When all that is said and done, how does that process and how is that going to change this country or larger than that?
I think it'll be normalized, and I think it'll be, perceived like other products. I mean, I see it as being another product on the shelf, maybe like beer or wine or something like that, has some risks, but that, it's very much normalized. Regulations that are obviously more consistent across states and not lead to this fracturing, which is incredibly problematic. I think it is important to do it right. Josh mentioned, some regulators don't know what they're doing, and you can create a whole host of problems with bad regulation. I hope that it doesn't go down that route. I think, we should have at this point know enough that we can do some of that sort of stuff well, but I think it's a matter of paying attention to the science, and it can be, integrated into our life. And then, on the other side of things, I think there's a lot of people that could benefit from cannabis with various health ailments, that I'm continually amazed with when I read things at some of the benefits. I mean, it is by no means a cure-all, and I'm not saying it is, but like there are definitely a number of applications that I think can help people, whether it be for anxiety or PTSD or seizures or pain or relaxation, or, the list goes on and on, because it is not this like evil plant product that's going to make you lose your mind and go crazy. I mean, there are definitely some people that shouldn't use it. I mean, I'm going to reiterate that again and again. It's not risk-free. Nothing is risk-free for that matter. But when used responsibly and we better understand the scientists or the science behind it, I think it can provide a lot of benefit. And
thank you, Echo. And Josh, the business side, how does this change the world?
So there's a world of people who don't like to drink and go to the bar and do the things that society say these are the normal ways of socializing. And cannabis, as it normalizes and becomes something that's more standardized, is going to open up this third space, this third place that's different than bars, that's different than these other situations we've seen. And the ability for culture to grow around these nodes is real. And so I think that there is an opportunity for there to be, because there's a kind of a way for people to express themselves. I mean, even someone like me, I love cannabis. I don't think I'd be making products for like a heart defibrillator or something else. Like, it just doesn't interest me. Cannabis interests me, and cannabis really interests a lot of other people. And I didn't even know I liked business until I started doing cannabis business. I was like a musician and I sold kind of weed on the side. It was just fun, but then I started really getting into the business aspect, and it opened my eyes. It's like, oh my gosh, I can learn all about business through this plant. Well, guess what? People have that realization. I can learn all about biology through this plant. I can learn all about chemistry through this plant. I can learn all about carpentry through this plant by building out the grows, right? I can learn about light science and all these other things that you just never would have thought of in your day-to-day. Because it becomes legal, all of this opportunity to specialize around it, educate around it, and build things around it, it becomes real. So there's this social space aspect that I think is really interesting when you go to a friend. I went to a friend's house. We didn't drink anything. We just smoked. It wasn't a drinking thing. It was during this, week. And I think that, those conversations are different than the conversations fueled by alcohol. And so you just have these touch points, these different growth points that are going to be, as they become more normalized, I think will make a society that has a hope that has a little bit more balance. Like, we can turn left and right in a sense. We're not just one-sided. And so I think cannabis has a way of adding a dimension to our culture while at the same time sort of taking you to another dimension. So
Thank you. Appreciate that perspective too, Josh. Very interesting. Going into our final thoughts, I want to really kind of highlight two things that stuck out to me. Josh, you actually said both these, one of which makes me think of the information age that we are in, have been for some time. There are good things and there are bad things about having information readily available. And there's a lot of misinformation. There's also a lot of good information. Sorting it out in this topic, along with other topics, very difficult to do. So just keep in mind, right, that is always in play. Second thing I like too is I really like that you've coined, an echo. So I really hope that takes off. Like, when someone says, I'm going to Google something, I hope that in the future people say, you know what, I think I need to bring in an echo for this. This really could use an echo. So I just really want to highlight that too and hope that takes off. And from there, I'm going to yield to Tim.
My final thoughts. I always following up with Dan. Dan always kind of takes some ideas, but I'm going to expound upon Dan's thoughts a little bit on the sense of the experts. And I'm going to take actually from one of our new team members, Gerard, who was on our podcast last week, and say that I think this episode embodied exactly our title, which is Critical Thinking Required. And it goes back down to experts. We are sitting here with two experts, both on the toxicology side as well as the business side of cannabis. And oh man, did I learn a lot, right? And we read quite a bit, and we talk about cannabis quite a bit from an investment perspective. But talking about from Josh's fragmentation to echo from the standpoint of just the limited research. And I know that's popular from the standpoint, but like the true limited research that's actually been done with this plant and the skewness between both of you with the media or even grant writing. I mean, I was baffled that I had no idea in California, the state of California, you have, as Josh said, Northern California and Southern California, and you can't even cross borders within the same state. And people think that they can invest in this industry right now with ease. I mean, right there, that just like makes my eyes go back, right? Like that's just that level of difficulty is something that's so nuanced specifically to this industry, where you really, really need to start, if you want to get into this business from an investment perspective, you really need to start talking to people. You need an Echo and you need a Josh to kind of go off of Dan's comments, right? To truly understand the nuances, because as we always talk about, a circle of competence is so, so important. And the two of you have it and understand this industry to such a high degree that you can really grasp where the holes are, the growth, the cons, the pros, the risks. And I just can't thank you two enough for joining our podcast, just to be able to, again, highlight what we're trying to do, which is being, critically required.
You can, just to clarify, with California, we know that you can move between the north and the south. It's just hard. You just got to kind of be creative.
Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that.
I don't really have much. I just want to echo Tim's comments about the fragmentation. We've known of that. We just, of course, not to the detail that you guys clearly know about it. And from an investment point of view, it always comes down to understanding the industry's dynamics of like, is it vertically integrated, horizontally integrated? Or is it just a grower? Is it a dispensary? Is it a distributor? Nobody knows. It's just too fragmented in the regulatory landscape, the political landscape, and the business landscape, as a matter of fact. When you put all that together, you can't just invest in one company. You have to invest in multiple. It's like the VC, the venture capital approach. You throw a bunch of darts at a dartboard, and one of them is going to get in that bullseye, but you just don't know which. So as always, I always like to say on our podcast, you got to be rational about your expectations of these kinds of investments. You may lose your shirt on some of them. So that just speaks to what we say to our clients all the time, that when it comes to these, what I would term to be speculative investments, simply because of the regulatory, of the fragmented landscapes that we've touched on so much, in that the government and business is just not clicking. There isn't a lot of in sync there. You have to be aware that you can't put money into these things that you can't afford to lose. So that's just me being up on my soapbox. Echo, would you like to say your last words?
Yeah, I would just say, from my perspective, is that it's important to remember, there's lots of nuance. And so even if you read something on the internet, read a little more. You probably still don't have it down. And although there is the tendency to greatly simplify things, there's a lot of complexity to it. And, there's risk, from the scientific health perspective. It's not risk-free, but there can also be benefits to do your research. And sorry, my dog decided to just, did you hear that?
Yeah, a little bit, but
Pepper pulls out a bone and she starts chewing on it and then belches.
That's adorable.
we can leave it in. We'll just clarify it was Pepper, not you.
Some good Dr. Pepper happening right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My closing thoughts are, smoke cannabis if you feel it's right for you. Good
Right.
trick is to smoke things that smell good to you. So if you don't like the smell, don't smoke it. Okay. That's a really good way. Is it going to work? Also, think about the common frames about things. When do if it's orangey or lemony or grapefruity or citrusy, or it's going to be more something that you use in the morning, like orange juice. If it's a little sweeter and more purpley and just a little bit more of that dessert kind of end of the day flavor, it's a dessert. It's called gelato. It's called cookie. Okay. It's sweet. You eat that after dinner, you eat that at night. So use, why does pizza smell better than cold pizza? Or why does meat cooked smell better? It's evolution. And so because we have this inherent system in our body that interacts with cannabis, there's evolutionary things that are happening. Things that smell good, smoke those. Don't smoke too much of them until you know what it does. Then smoke what makes you feel good. Smoke till you feel good, I guess to say. But those are my kind of closing thoughts. And if people do that, the addressable market grows, more people become informed about what cannabis does, and overall, there's more education in the industry because of direct experience.
We can't thank the two of you enough for joining us. It's been fantastic. We knew that it was going to be. Thank you for sharing all this valuable information. I mean, these guys said it very well. We just not, I don't know if I could even call it a tip of the iceberg that we know. And we just appreciate you taking this dive with us. And thank you to all our viewers for always participating and joining us. We appreciate you being part of us, part of this, and we wish you a very good night. Until next time, take care.
Thank you for taking the time to start your journey of thinking differently and listening to LBW talk about stuff they love. Until next time. Thank you for taking the time to start your journey of thinking differently and listening to LBW talk about stuff they love. Until next time.